Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about a new survey that details how companies view generative AI, including issues like privacy and security risks and training issues. To discuss that, I'm joined by Neil Cohen, head of go-to-market strategy at Portal26. Neil, hello to you, and welcome aboard today.
Thanks, James. It's a delight to be here. Been a fan of eWEEK for a long time.
Fantastic. We always love to hear it. So I know I've got some insightful questions. Before we get to my very insightful questions, it'd be good to know, what exactly does Portal26 do? I know that plenty of people know the company, but for those who don't know it as much, what does the company do?
Well, the company actually just pivoted from being known as Titanium, so it's now Portal26.ai. But they had this wonderful security product for encryption of search and things along like that. It was a very important product, but they saw the change that was going on with generative AI in the marketplace and saw that they can better apply those security protocols as well as some other features and functions that were going to be really needed. And so when you look at Portal 26, you have to take a step back and think every generative AI program is a nascent program. And like anything that's net new, even if it's just within a year, you need to build it on a solid foundation. And what is a solid foundation for those kind of things? You need visibility and observability. You need to know what's going on. You need to monitor, track. You need data and analytics, just like in cybersecurity. You need governance, like you need guardrails and rules and regs, and you have to have people to accept them and know those regs and be able to push that. You need to have security. And we'll talk a little bit about more of this later, because you're not only taking data out and putting it out and then taking it back and putting it back in, but you're creating new intellectual property on the fly. How do you secure that transfer of data back and forth? And then you also have education, which is important. And so Portal 26 is the foundation that pulls all those things together.
Okay, well, that's actually a pretty big list of things to pull together, actually. All right, so there's a survey, the 2023 State of Generative AI Survey, sponsored by Portal26. And I think the interesting thing about this, it must be either one of the first, or perhaps even the first full generative AI survey, one of the first. Yeah. Let's talk through some of the data points. There's some key points that we could talk about them specifically. First, is there an overall couple of key takeaways, just from reading the whole thing? What matters the most from this survey as you see it?
Yeah, there's a few things that I think, maybe they validate what a lot of people are thinking, but I think there were a couple of surprises. I think, when people talk about generative AI, they talk about the hopes and fears. So that yin and yang is very prevalent in the data, where you have 80% plus people going, this is going to be transformative technology. We kind of liken it to the change from when we went to desktops in the workplace. Productivity shifted dramatically for workers. And I think you're going to see the same thing happen when people take on generative AI. But that created new problems for businesses in the enterprise around data security, information, those types of things. So you have, again, 80+% of the companies going like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. And then you have the same number of people saying like, holy crap, data security, other issues that are on the downside. And so how do you balance those things? And I think the next biggest stat out of all of it was that when we looked across all industries, 12 different industries, 73% of them in the last year or so had a misuse incident with generative AI. So those are the ones that are admitting it, right? 73%. When you look at some verticals like the legal profession of the people that we queried, 100% of them had a problem.
Oh, and actually that was a survey response was 100%. So really, basically every single company, everyone admitted they had a problem with it.
Everybody in the legal profession said 100% we had a problem. 73% in total of all the 12 different verticals said we had a problem.
Right.
So really, it's again, going back to when we were talking about what's Portal 26, it's nascent, and you're watching people learn how to use and adopt and adapt this incredible technology in real time, and mistakes are made. I think, and again, your listeners probably know this, but I'll try to say it in a way that's not condescending. That box, people look at it and it looks like a search box, and we're used to kind of that form factor when you're in a chat GPT or something other, that prompt box looks like
Right.
a search box.
Sure.
So if you treat it like search, you're going to get a different kind of response than if you treat it like a prompt, because you're trying to tease out the right information. You're not trying to, search is 100% about intent. Um,
Right. Right.
generative AI is about creation. That's a
Hmm.
different kind of thing. So what you're going to ask it, how are you going to talk to it, what you're going to try to tease out or have it help you do is very different. And so that's a big part of the challenge of people trying to adapt to this new technology.
Well, it's an interesting point, and that I'm sure a lot of people do look at that and think of it. This is sort of like a search box, and I've entered terms to Google a million times before, so I know how to do this. And of course, actually creating a search term and creating a prompt that does, prompt the system to really create something is a very different task. As a matter of fact, it's a far more difficult task. There's even a thing called prompt engineering, which is a career for certain people, which I find that really interesting.
Well, it's brand new, right? Like it never
It is. I mean, when I grow up, I want to be a prompt engineer. It sounds like a great job, really.
Well, I
Um,
don't know. I don't know where you were in 1981 or 82 or 83, but there were no IT people. We were all accidental IT people. It's like the person who was able to figure out how to put the floppy disk in and out became the IT person for the audience. It's not like that anymore. So,
right, right. Probably, fortunately. Um, there's a couple points from the survey which I think are fascinating. One is the majority of respondents, 84%, have or are planning to invest in Gen AI. And I have
yeah,
to wonder about the other 16%. You're not going to invest in that, but okay.
right,
And of those respondents, 85% are concerned about the privacy and security risks. And I
right.
guess I would have a question for the other 15%. You're really not concerned about the privacy and security risks?
Yes.
I don't know. Thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because there was kind of like a bifurcation on those numbers. The smaller the organizations, the less intimidated they were, which is interesting. When you got 5,000 and below, the numbers kind of dragged down the averages. When you got to 5,000 and above, as far as company size,
Yep.
100% were top two boxes for 10,000 and above. And it was like 95% were concerned about data and security risks, and that 5,000 and above. So I don't know what it is about the smaller organizations or the entrepreneurs. Maybe they feel like they got their arms around it, whatever. Similar with cybersecurity, your biggest problems walk in and out of the door every day. It's your people. So I guess the large organizations are more circumspect about what that's going to mean when it
Right.
comes to something like this. Uh, and there are other things too. Like, when you look at some of those numbers, especially with things like shadow AI, just like shadow IT, who's buying IT in the organization with their credit card to make their job easier? That's going around the
Right.
CTO and the CISO and using company data. I'm a marketing guy, right? Like marketing people, the worst shadow IT people. You've got a
Right.
lot of that going on with shadow AI, where you have people going like, well, I don't care if my company banned it. I'm going to go home. I'm going to pull that data. I'm going to go home on my personal laptop. I'm going to feed that in. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to come back. I'm going to put it back in the system.
Hmm.
Right. So you've got a lot of people who are, working with the productivity. Many people still don't understand, although more and more are, that the public models, when you feed data into them, it becomes public. And
Right.
remember, you can tease information out of AI, right? It's like a little kid. It's like, like, oh, you've got a secret. Well, if I ask it the right questions, I'm going to get the answers. And
Right.
there's already been data breaches. Samsung had a huge one where people were feeding in sensitive information into a public model, and that information became public. So if you're a company with a lot of intellectual property that, patents that have secrets that aren't wide open to the world, or you're doing code, or you have social security numbers, email addresses, phone numbers, all that type of stuff, and people are processing that's a big concern for organizations. And you see in the larger organizations, they have a high level of fear against that, less in the smaller organizations, but still, over 60% concerned.
It makes sense. Well, we've talked about this next point, but I think it's worth touching on. From the survey, companies are concerned for good reason. 2/3 of companies using Gen AI tools have experienced a related security or misuse incident in the last year. And we know there's a lot of reasons for that. Do you think it's still fairly minor though? I mean, it's still like, oh, we put in this. I mean, it's how big a problem do you think that really is?
Well, you're right. Not every problem, is the biggest problem. I have a saying like, don't just do something, stand there. Let's see what
Right, right. Yeah.
let's see what it is first before we freak out, right?
Yeah.
But but I think again, when you look at the data, that's what people admitted. Um, and
Right.
and maybe they were able to contain the damage or stop it before it happened or contact people or didn't have to report it because they weren't a public company or weren't under the right guidelines and regulations where they had to let people know. So how bad is it? My guess is some of it's not as bad as we think it is, and then some of it's not as good as we think it is, right?
Right. Right.
But it still shows that people are trying to learn how to use this, which gets to one of the things you said early in your intro about education, where, and again, if you get back to this idea that when we put PCs on everybody's desk, everybody had to learn how to use them. Uh,
Hmm.
and if you didn't, you got left behind. And I know people who got left behind. I have peers who
Yeah,
got left
I
behind.
do
They said,
too.
oh,
Right.
right? I'm going to stick with my IBM Selectric. I'm not a word processor. I don't need that thing. You know, screw email, all of
Yeah.
that, right?
Right. Right.
So education is going to be a big component. And when you look at the survey, there's a swath of people, like of the companies that we interviewed, they're giving less than 5 hours of training to their employees.
Yes. Yeah, 58%, I see, said they're providing less than 5 hours of annual generative AI education and training their employees. In other words, and the question becomes, well, I don't think the average staff member should be expected to really understand these platforms and all the ramifications. So if the company isn't training them, what would you expect?
Yeah, well, again, it depends on what your posture is. If you see this as the next transformative stage in productivity in the organization, and that this is going to, like by some means, like McKinsey, has a report out, 40% possibly better. That you've got reports and estimates out that this could add trillions of dollars to the economy in a very short period of time by taking people off the menial tasks and focusing on things that could be more productive or more innovative for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then how are you going to train people so that they do become in some way prompt engineers for their vertical? If I'm running a marketing organization, and I want to optimize, let's say, my marketing automation or my account-based marketing, I don't have to have 5 people working over a 3-week time period to do kind of if-then email scenarios and what's the best thing. The artificial intelligence can do all of that. It can and it will. Now, what do I do with my marketing people? Well, there's a lot of other high value things that they can do in understanding trends, developing branded editorial that's more impactful, better events, putting time into other things and experiential things that kind of deliver a higher return on a really high return on investment and value on their time,
Mm-hmm.
than rearranging the email trees
Right.
for a 0.1 optimization. So I don't have to have my team do that, and I don't want my team to do that. But that's the same thing in finance. That's the same thing in legal. That's the same thing, across the board in sales. How am I going to pick the best prospects to go after? Well, artificial intelligence has been proven to be able to help you with that kind of stuff. I need to know and understand how to do that if I want to be the top salesperson or deliver quota. Or if I'm
Right.
the sales leader of that organization, these are things that I want my people to know. And the folks that don't do it are going to get left behind.
All right. So here's, I think, an interesting point from the survey. Nearly all respondents, 99%, indicated they have or are going to invest in a generative AI data governance tool.
Yes.
It's almost like a tech question. I mean, the idea of a generative AI data governance tool, that tool's got to be so new, and yet it's in charge of something really sensitive like data governance. I just am kind of wondering about that.
Well, it's a good thing to wonder about. It's not to make a shameless plug. It's why Portal26 kind of jumped on it, because they saw that you were going to need these rules and guidelines. But if you go back and and see what people are doing now. And I know this because I've talked to a number of CISOs and I've talked to a lot of leaders of different departments like marketing and sales and that type of thing. They got an email, from, the CISO or the chief risk officer of the organization. Here's our rules and regulations. Don't violate these.
Right,
you
right.
know, there's no acceptance. There's no sign off. There's no monitoring or measurement if people are staying within those guidelines. So governance right now is super loosey goosey, right? So what I would say is that there's a number of companies out there that have governance tools that they're trying to put into place, similar to this. I think this is a foundational thing. I think a lot of other people that we've heard from CISOs believe that it's a foundational thing. Better than an email and kind of nodding your head and hoping and wishing, than having something where people are forced to read a policy and accept it. Even better yet, if you can have visibility and monitoring or some type of sensitivity that when you put something into the tool, into the prompt that isn't within guidelines, that maybe you get flagged and says like, that looks a lot like a social security number. Are you sure you want to put that in there?
Right.
Okay, like not so much that we want to put Clippy on everybody again, but I think that there's an educational component to governance that also has to accompany what you're doing, because you don't just want to slap people on the wrist or say, don't do this, don't do that. You want to encourage good behaviors, you want to point them in the right direction. Hey, we saw you using ChatGPT, today that's not a sanctioned tool, but this one is, right? Whatever it might be.
Well, I mean, that's all from the survey. I think, as we face generative AI or leverage generative AI, I think one of the biggest questions that I'm wondering is, it remains reasonably unpredictable. What it's going to do for us, how it's going to evolve. It's going to evolve, I think, sort of in a hockey stick upward move to the right, and so it's going to evolve because I think ChatGPT 11 is probably going to be able to write ChatGPT 12, et cetera. So it's and so where does all that go? It's a quantum leap. So I think even the executives, they might not fully understand the technology. We don't know exactly where it's going to go. I'm not sure what my question is. I just think it's interesting as we face this. It's a powerful technology, but it's not a predictable technology. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that goes back to the hopes and fears.
Right.
What is this thing going to be? Is it going to become a tool? Because that's really what it is. All it is a tool. It's a powerful tool, but it's a tool. And so, or is it going to be our overlord, right?
Right. I mean, maybe it'll be more than a tool, and that, well, I guess for some people really will lose their jobs to it. So I guess for them, it becomes actually a worker. I guess a worker at some level is a tool, to the larger sense of the word.
But jobs will change, just like it did, James, just like it did with PCs. Jobs change. They said the same thing when the desktop came. Oh, people are going to lose their jobs, but it created new jobs, and it continues to create new jobs. And I think this will create new jobs. You just mentioned earlier prompt engineer, and that's one area of how to do that. But
right.
Uses, strategic uses for AI, applied AI. Like, how are you going to apply it? What are the right uses? How do you manage it with an organization? I think there's going to be lots of things that are going to come out that we don't even know what the new jobs are yet. Prompt engineer didn't exist a couple of, 2 or 3 years ago. It does now. What else new is going to exist? I think another thing to answer your question is we never know, if you look historically, what the eventual outcome of these breakthrough or transformative moments are.
Right.
You could look at, any given moment. You could look at the car, the internal combustion engine in the car, and the miracle, the miracle it was supposed to create for us, and yet look at the problems it's created for us as well. And
sure,
you can say, who could have predicted? Maybe you could have predicted, but I don't think people predicted, what it's done for us from an infrastructure perspective, from a global warming or climate change perspective, how fossil fuels drives a lot of geopolitics. That's all from that one invention. Those are all the unintended consequences or outcomes when you play things out down the road. Yet, when you look at everything else about it, it's also created some amazing things for everybody in this world. And so you look at generative AI that same way. you have to go into it with open arms and eyes. Yes, let's embrace it, but let's also beware. I think that's why when Sam Altman it was in front of Congress talking about let's get the guardrails, let's get the guidelines, let's get the guardrails up by government now before this thing does get out of hand. So
Yeah, although I mean this is a big topic, of course. I think the snafu with Sam Altman this week kind of showed that it's part of that was between the forces that want to accelerate AI and other forces that wanted to slow it down and put the guardrails on. It seemed like at the end of the day, the forces that want to accelerate it won out this week. But maybe that's off topic. I don't know.
well, it's not, because if you look at any CEO or any board right now, and this is like, what are the drivers for adoption? I have already heard about this. I haven't heard it firsthand, but I don't think it's long for the world when you have quarterly earnings reports and you have institutional investors, pressing the C-suite. What's your generative AI strategy? And
What is
they're
not long
feeling
for this
that.
world?
What?
What do you mean? When you say it's not long for this world, what is the
No, I mean,
subject?
it's not long until it happens, right? It's going to happen quicker.
Oh yes, exactly right. No doubt. I mean, yes, they will. What is your generative AI strategy? That question will be urgent and compelling.
And why? Because increased productivity is increased revenue, is increased innovation, is increased profitability. And whether people like it or not when they hear this, we're a capitalistic driven organization. And a lot of people said with Altman, not to make political commentary, well, it chased the money. Well, we don't know what went on, and we don't know all the people
Right.
politics, and
Right.
and so let's not muse about that. What we can say though is that there is a large number of people that are driving this, that are looking at it for increased profits, increased
Oh,
revenue,
sure. Yes.
increased productivity.
Yeah.
And so that's the driver, because there's a belief. And when you look at other hype cycles of the last recent years, like metaverse, blockchain,
Yeah.
crypto, those things will be around and they're fine and good and they have their incredibly good uses, but nothing matches the reality of the hype cycle like generative AI is right now.
It's true. I mean, it's very true. And on that note, that definitive note, Neil, I think we've said it. A lot of good stuff. I've learned a ton from talking with you. Thank you.
Oh, this was such a fun conversation, James. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Please come back and talk with us again sometime.
Would love that. Thank you.